Number 10. The King's Speech. I think it's the style of filmmaking that particularly draws me to this one. Director Tom Hooper creates a very constrictive atmosphere by using off-center framing and wide camera angles. It's almost like something out of David Lynch. The film is based on the real-life friendship between King George VI and Lionel Logue, who was the linguist hired to help the king with his stammer, particularly in preparation for the speech he was to give to the nation on the outbreak of the Second World War. The performances from Colin Firth as the King and Geoffrey Rush as Logue are fantastic, and the two of them share a convincing chemistry that I would wager comes close to the real thing. Firth conveys great emotion when it comes to his character's frustrations with his ailment, as well as with the new pressures of having to lead a nation on the outbreak of war, whilst Rush plays a calm and collected voice of reason, on hand to offer whatever support he can to his new friend. The two of them are a joy to watch. The film also has a good educational quality to it. I don't know much about the history of the British royal family, it's just not something I'm interested in, but I do occasionally like a film or TV series that can also teach me a couple of things. I didn't know King George VI had a stammer. Now I do. Really nothing else to say about this one, except that it's a pleasurable British classic with an excellent cast and a unique film style. Number 9. This is Spinal Tap. It was actually The Simpsons that introduced me to this film, as Spinal Tap appeared in one of the episodes. I never know whether to call this a rock-you-mockumentary or a mock-you-rockumentary, but either way, this is a genius comedy that satirises rock documentaries. Michael McKean, Christopher Guest and Harry Shearer each play the respective idiotic and inept members of the British rock band Spinal Tap. Rob Reiner plays a filmmaker who follows them on tour as they promote a new album on LP. For those that don't know what an LP is, there's a Wikipedia link in the description. Just like the Blair Witch Project, I think what makes this film work so well is the fact that it was all improvised and filmed like an actual documentary. None of the dialogue was actually scripted. The actors were given directions as to where the story was going, but other than that, it's all made up on the spot, and it all comes across very naturally, which adds to the humour in my opinion. Whilst the writing and directing are both great, what makes this film work best for me is the performances. Everyone in this film is just brilliant and a joy to watch. Christopher Guest's character, Nigel Tufnell, is one of my favourite comedy characters. I am always quoting his lines. Well, these go to 11. These go to 11. Well, it's one higher, isn't it? Number 8. Apollo 13. I've always been something of a space nut, so I love anything to do with space and space exploration. I was 10 when Apollo 13 came out, and I wanted to see it right from the get-go. Although it may not be much of a big deal nowadays, one of the major things about this film was how they created the weightlessness effects. They constructed replica interiors of the Command and Lunar modules inside a Boeing KC-135, also known as the Vomit Comet, which creates brief periods of weightlessness by flying on a parabola. Whilst the cast and performances are superb, as well as the writing and direction, it's the recreation of what it must have been like on board a dead spacecraft floating in deep space that really sells it for me. During the scenes in space, you really get a feeling of how cramped and cold it is. The actors look like they are struggling just as much as the actual crew must have been. It looks so uncomfortable. As mentioned, the cast is spot on and all do a great job. The never-failing Tom Hanks plays Jim Lovell, the commander of the mission, while Kevin Bacon, Gary Sinise and the late Bill Paxton play Jack Swigert, Ken Mattingly and Fred Hayes respectively. My personal favourite though is Ed Harris as Flight Operations Director Gene Kranz. He is perfectly cast. I've seen actual documentary footage of the real Gene Kranz during the Apollo 13 mission, and Harris's performance is almost uncanny. This is a film that I never tire of watching. I could literally watch it over and over again without getting bored. It's also a film that really makes me react to what I'm watching. I always end up talking to the characters and cheering during the good bits. It may not be absolutely 100% accurate to what actually happened, but it comes damn near close enough for me. Houston, I have no problem with this one. Number 7. Ghostbusters. Do you even need me to tell you why this film is on my top 20, or top 10 for that matter? This film is loved by so many people for many different reasons, but what makes this a personal favourite for me is that it combines great comedy with great horror. When I was writing this, I thought horror might be too strong of a word, but then I thought... Nah, I think horror works. This is a buddy comedy like no other. The three protagonists, namely Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd and the late Harold Ramis respectively, all work off of each other beautifully, and the comedy timing is just excellent. What I love about them is their personalities. Murray plays Pete Venkman, a child in a man's body with a deadpan sense of humour. Dan Aykroyd plays Ray Stantz, a lovable and clever but slightly naive member of the team, and the late Harold Ramis plays Egon Spengler, basically the stereotypical science nerd, but one of the finest examples of such in my opinion. The supporting cast is also excellent. Ernie Hudson comes on board as Winston, the fourth Ghostbuster. Annie Potts plays Bolshie receptionist Janine. The always wonderful Sigourney Weaver plays Dana Barrett. And the comedy legend that is Rick Moranis plays the bumbling Lewis Tully. Without a doubt, though, it's William Atherton as the disgustingly likeable Walter Pecker.
My name is Peck.
Who steals the show. I absolutely love watching this guy, especially when he gets a ton of marshmallow dumped on him at the end. Some of the effects may look a bit dated now, but that's kind of forgivable since this was made in 1984. That doesn't ruin the enjoyment of the film though. Most of what you see really lives up to the hype. Even today I get goosebumps when I see the Marshmallow Man stomping down the street, or I hear Goza's voice echoing above the clouds. It's all just so memorable, pure nostalgia. This is a film that everybody is familiar with. Even if you haven't seen it, you still know it. Everyone knows the theme tune, of course, but there's also that one question that can never again be asked without thinking about this film. I'm not saying it. Number 6. Lethal Weapon. This film series never gets old for me. The perfect pairing of Mel Gibson and Danny Glover has got to be one of the finest comedy pairings there's ever been on film, and that's just from the first film. From the second film onwards, we have Joe Pesci completing the trio. I absolutely love following Riggs and Murtaugh as they bumble their way through a case. Oddly enough, it's the complete and utter lack of sophistication that makes this team work. There's constant bickering and arguing, and there's no way you would take these two professionally in real life. Gibson's performance as Riggs is very heartfelt and genuine, particularly in the first film when he is clearly playing a pained and troubled man after the recent death of his wife. You can see the pain he's going through, but you can also see the growing affection and trust he has for his new partner and friend. The same goes for Danny Glover as Murtaugh, who is also a little lost at first, but is constantly discovering new things about himself through his friendship with Riggs. There is a TV series based on the films, and I did try watching a few of the episodes. It's not bad, but for me, the absence of Gibson and Glover was just too obvious, and I just couldn't get into it. You'd think that I'd be excited by the prospect of a fifth Lethal Weapon film, apparently in the works as we speak, but to tell you the truth, I kinda hope they don't go through with it. I think that the 4 films are solid as they are, and I fear a 5th one would just be out of place, especially after such a long time since the 4th one back in 1998. Don't get me wrong, I admire Gibson and Glover for wanting to give it a go, as well as Richard Donner for returning to direct one last time, but, well, let's just hope that they're not getting too old for this shit. Number 5. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Oddly enough, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Turtles when I was a kid. I did like them, but I wasn't massively into them. I watched the cartoon, but that was about it. I can't remember the first time I watched the live-action film, but I've loved it for as long as I can remember. There is so much to like about this film. The characters, the costumes, the music, the action, the comedy, the story, the cast. It just gets so many things right, considering its strange concept. The costumes were created by Jim Henson in his workshop. Now, for those of you who have been living under a rock for the past several decades, Jim Henson was the puppeteer who created the Muppets. I have to give a shout out to the Shredder in this version. He is so unbelievably intimidating. I would not want to come up against this guy in a dark alley at night. Just look at that headgear and the outfit he wears. I say this version because future appearances of the Shredder in other Turtle films, not so good. By far, the most impressive character has to be Splinter. His puppet is just so good, and one would very nearly think this thing is real. The realistic features that go into these characters are amazing. There's one scene, for example, where Splinter is tied up as a prisoner, and you can actually see him sweating. There's glistening all over his skin and fur. You can feel what he's feeling, and it's just a puppet. That is extraordinary. The music is also incredible, not so much the songs, although there are a couple of good ones, I'll admit, but the background music conveys so much emotion and really makes you feel what's going on in the scene. Because of this, along with some great performances and direction, a lot of the scenes actually still make me teary. The sequels, unfortunately, were a bit of a letdown, particularly the third one. The violence was toned down and the focus was more on the slapstick comedy, but I admit I still occasionally like to watch them as a guilty pleasure. The Michael Bay adaptations, though, let's just not talk about them. Number 4. Back to the Future. I can't really help but watch this trilogy as one long film. I can't watch the first one without immediately watching the other two. This film probably has my favourite soundtrack on the list. As soon as I start to hear it, I just can't help but sing along. It's Alan Silvestri's best in my opinion. The only real letdown for me about this trilogy was the 4-year gap between the first one and the second and third. There were changes that were made, and unfortunately it shows. The absence of Crispin Glover, for example, and the miscasting of Elizabeth Shue as Jennifer. The 3 films are still an absolute joy to watch though. It's the pairing of Chris Lloyd and Michael J. Fox as Doc Brown and Marty McFly respectively that make it work. A pairing that almost didn't happen because, as most people now know, it was originally Eric Stoltz who was cast as Marty. I think Tom Wilson as Biff, the bully, is one of the funniest bully characters there's ever been. Wilson plays it so well and is able to give a very versatile performance as the character changes throughout time. He can play a goofy and laughable suck-up, or he can play a downright menacing and borderline evil bastard. Of course, there are many famous film cars one might be able to think of. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Knight Rider, the Aston Martin DB5, etc. But whenever I have to think of one, I always think of the DeLorean first. It may not have been the world's greatest car on the roads, but this film made it a celebrity in its own right. I would give anything to own my very own DeLorean, kitted out with the time circuit and flux capacitor and so on. Chris Lloyd as Doc Brown has become arguably one of the most popular film characters, and rightly so. If ever I saw an actor best cast for a particular role, it's this one. He absolutely owns it. I just can't imagine anyone else playing this character. The way he looks with the white hair and the bulgy eyes, along with his zany voice and weird fashion sense, it all makes the perfect lovable crackpot inventor. By the way, who the hell is Great Scott? Number 3. The Shawshank Redemption. This one gets me going every time I see it. A flawless masterpiece if ever I saw one. It's most definitely a story about finding yourself and holding on to hope even in the worst situations. As someone who has experienced depression, I can certainly say I owe a lot to the morals of this film. Tim Robbins' portrayal of the innocent and cunning Andy Dufresne is spot on. He has a blankness to him that works well for the character. You never quite know what he's thinking or planning. As we all know, Morgan Freeman can lend his voice to anything and it would become watchable. The character of Red is one of my favourites of all time, and this has got to be one of Freeman's finest performances. I've read Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, the novella from which this film is based, and I couldn't help but hear Freeman's voice in my ear as I read it. The way the story is told is very interesting, particularly regarding the passage of time, which is shown very subtly but also very effectively. The film also does a great job extending the novella into something lengthy but plausible. History has shown that not every Stephen King book to film adaptation has been successful, but the ones that do work really stand out, and Shawshank stands out the most in my opinion. I'll most certainly be doing a video on this film at some point. There is lots to talk about. Number 2. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. It's a known fact that most sequels don't turn out as well as the original, let alone better. This film is a very rare exception. Not only is it classed as one of the most successful sequels of all time, it's also regarded as one of the greatest films of all time. I think every single thing in this film works brilliantly. It's a non-stop thrill ride from start to finish and never becomes boring, not even when there isn't much action. All performers do a superb job. Arnold Schwarzenegger returns as the cyborg from the future, along with Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor. Robert Patrick shines, quite literally, as the T-1000 Terminator, and Edward Furlong is okay as John Connor. Without a doubt, it's the special effects that take centre stage though. These effects were way ahead of their time, and most of them even hold up to this day, despite the film being 30 years old as of 2021. I was 6 when this film came out. When I say the special effects take centre stage, I'm not just talking about the CGI. I didn't know until recently, for example, that many of the T-1000 liquid metal effects are actually practical and not CGI. Like the bullet holes that appear in his body, or his head being split apart by a shotgun, or the lovingly named Pretzel Man, were all done practically. An absolutely amazing job all round. This film very nearly made my number 1, but there was just one film I couldn't put any lower. The majority of you will most likely disagree with me here, but that's okay, each to their own. And my number 1 most favourite film of all time is Pixels. Adam Sandler is on winning form here. I consider this film an absolute masterpiece. It's brilliantly written, brilliantly directed, and the acting is... I'm joking, of course it's not Pixels. My actual number 1 favourite film of all time is Psycho. As mentioned in a couple of my other videos, I am a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock's work. When I was studying theatre at university, I would research the various film and theatre methods used in his films, and I became so fascinated by it all. There are so many twists and turns in this film, and it constantly keeps you guessing. One minute you think you might know what's going on, but then the next minute you might not. It's genius writing, and the way it's all put together is just extraordinary. The way that Hitch made this film is what fascinates me the most. The film is based on a novel by Robert Bloch, who in turn wrote about the real-life murderer Ed Gein, who apparently had a twisted obsession with his mother. There are many other great stories about the making of this film. Hitch, not wanting people to read about the twist ending, apparently had his assistant buy all of the copies of the book so no one could read it ahead of the film. The budget was so limited that Hitch used the crew from his television series to do the filming, but I personally think that adds to the atmosphere of the film. It does look cheap and grainy, and obviously it's in black and white, but that all gives it this incredible eerie feel. I wouldn't have done it any other way. The filming techniques are nothing short of works of art. The angles and the editing give it all this abstract psychological feel. It's almost like you're seeing it all through the eyes of this Norman Bates character. Take this shot for example. Bates is simply leaning over to see something, but the way it's shot, looking up at his chin, is very unsettling. You just have no idea what this character is thinking, and shots like this really add to that, I think. Speaking of Norman Bates, I obviously have to mention Anthony Perkins in a perfectly cast role. He portrays this character so perfectly. It's as if he's not even trying. It just comes across so naturally. He comes across as kind and friendly, but at the same time awkward and maybe a little bit damaged. You feel sorry for him, but at the same time there's maybe something a little dangerous about it. You're not sure whether to trust him or not. I think the scene where Marion Crane is eating with Norman in the parlour room shows all of this the best. As she's speaking with him, you can tell that she's a little uneasy as he reveals things about his mother and his life with her, but she's also understanding him and starts to bond with him when he gets her to see the error of her ways. It's a brilliant scene. Janet Leigh, who plays Marion Crane, also does a good job here, but of course this performance is somewhat short-lived as, spoiler alert, her character meets her end only about half an hour into the film. There is just so much I could go into with this film, most of which I'll probably put into a separate video, but for now, I just have to say that Psycho is my all-time favourite film and I admire it on so many different levels. It's taught me so much about filming and editing methods, and I owe it a lot. If you haven't seen this film, please do check it out. My advice would be to watch it on a rainy night with the lights off. And those were my top 20 favourite films. I hope you've managed to stay with me up to here. My thanks to you if you did. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree with me? Please do let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, if you like what you see on this channel, please remember to subscribe for more and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. Until next time, retro lovers, bye bye.